They can affect the environment with just their presence. A moving natural disaster.
Too powerful to tame, too difficult to reproduce. Sounds like an elder dragon.
Possibly the first ever seen elder dragon in the Monster Hunter series is coming back to our screens next year. Monster Hunter Wilds expansion Ascendance is coming in 2027, and so now that we've got at least 6 months for the fans to go collectively insane, we can use this time to pick apart what we know, first of which being a new returning monster. Lao Shan Lung can trace its resume all the way back to the original Monster Hunter 1 on the PlayStation 2. Locked away to the online-only portion of the game way back when, this behemoth appeared at the end of one of the first trailers to appear for the OG. Fun facts: you used to be able to get an early preview of the music for this fight if you went into the Monster Hunter 1 options menu from the title screen, and I was bewitched by this music as a younger lad. Plus, a Lao Shan Lung video was the first video I ever watched on YouTube. I did some Neoseeker form searching through guides and wanted to see the fight. I'm nothing if not consistent for my love of the series. But enough reminiscing. This video is about what on earth they're going to do with Lao Shan Lung in Ascendance. Considering how much Monster Hunter has evolved since these earlier days, the length and breadth of the new mechanics, items, hunting actions and even damage formulae, we're looking at a very different playing field for the old mountain dragon. Gone are the days where you're just shoved in a quest with yourself in the item box. You've got your handler, you've got support hunters, your mount, the Swiss Army knife of your cat all in one to help out. I think it's best that we start by looking at the star of the show. Lao Shan Lung is a colossal elder, characterized by this immense size, but also its scarcity and passive nature. It's theorized that these lads spend many years hiding away, forging a shell comprised of various minerals, sediment and the like. It's rarely aggressive, so you may wonder why on earth we're fighting it. If it isn't outwardly aggressive and has no real desire to hurt us humans, how on earth are we going to get Alma on side to authorize this hunt for us? Originally, Lao Shan was said to be moving territories in fear of another monster that had encroached into its area. This was theorized to be the legendary black dragon Fatalis. Of course, that implication hits especially neatly in the context of the story of Wilds, considering the similarities between the Fatalis family and Xochitl. Could we be seeing a further elaboration on this man-made atrocity? Could it be a tease for another member of the Fatalis family somewhere down the line? Only time will tell, and for now we'll have to wonder why we're putting the boot to something just out for a stroll. And herein lies the reason that Lao is such a huge threat. I mean, something that large isn't going to be able to just ballet dance from place to place, is it? Every step is a seismic event, each shift of its body visible from space. A real force of nature barreling through a mountain range with no concern for what's in its way. In previous games, the hunting ground had to be a specially designed fortress outfitted with ballista, cannons and even a dragonator, as a response to this massive threat, forced to flee by an unknown yet greater force. Problem is, with all this fantastical information, legendary beast and dramatic setting, the vast majority of people will agree that fighting Lao Shan is not a fun experience. Why is that? Well, it's because the fight is seen as, for all intents and purposes, a bit shit. Lao Shan is often considered by many to be the first siege monster fight, but what does that mean? Siege is a term that gets brought up a lot thanks to cases like Kulve Taroth or Safi Jiva from 5th generation being described as such, but it's easy to point out similarities that other encounters have to these monsters in the franchise. Namely, they have a highly scripted route through a unique area. They also have an emphasis on using specialized tools scattered about, such as cannons or dragonators. And finally, a lot of these will feature a unique quest mechanic for failure, such as the monster fleeing or perhaps damage being done to a construction. Lao is a dead ringer for this classification and thus is often defined as the first siege encounter by many people, despite not being explicitly referred to as one. It's really a case-by-case basis on what qualifies as a siege to any one person, and the definition is very esoteric, but as a general rule we'll use those 3 points I mentioned before when talking in regards to it. At its core, one could liken the Lao Shan fight to an auto-scroller level, or one of those hateful Assassin's Creed tailing missions. The Elder plods through the canyon in its own little private bus lane, going from zone to zone, all whilst you wail on it. It's a big stinking sack of hit points that soaks up abuse from 4 hunters at a time with ease, all while slowly advancing towards the fort entrance at the end of the canyon. In its last appearance, Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate, hunters in there were offered the ability to use cannon blasts for slow but consistent damage, ballista for fast but weaker shots, and a ballista binder to hold the thing in place in all areas. Not to mention, since the inception of the monster, you could also jump down from ledges to place specialised bombs and even obtain some carves. So it appears as though there was a vast variety of options in the fight, right? You would think. Problem is, no matter your expertise, no matter your strategy, the average hunter is still looking at a hard minimum of around 20 minutes for a hunt, and that's with an optimised strategy. No reward for maximising damage, no benefit to exploiting weaknesses, you're never going to see that clock hand faced east. You could blame this on how monsters like this, for example Safi Jiva, Korv Tarath, Wildgog, Mautios, etc., are influenced in part by MMO designs. Despite Monster Hunter being a franchise that at its core design doesn't really mesh well with these traditional MMO tropes. There's no role diversity such as tanks or supports, much as they seem to be trying to force that through the enmity mechanic from Behemoth collab, and not to mention Monster Hunter is famously, until recently, a series that encouraged learning through information deprival. Health bars, weak spots, status meters and other such information were famously withheld from players in the early days of Lao Shan, and even in its last appearance we didn't have a little skull icon on the minimap to tell us when we were close to winning. This lack of information leads to a specific mechanic becoming the player's worst enemy during the encounter. The mechanic in question is the usage of health gates. Monsters throughout the series will have sections such as Deviljho crawling through vines and worlds, the different phase changes for Fatalis, Eschaton Judgment, even during digging animations such as the first ever Monoblos. There are situations where the monster just isn't allowed to die, and thus the health bar is stopped at a determined percentage. There can be many reasons for this, for example to prevent a death in an inaccessible area, or to ensure that the monster gets off its final big attack, or in Lao's case, to make sure that you see the whole show. Put simply, Lao Shan simply will not die until it reaches the final area of the map. No matter how much mustard you put on it, you cannot and will not see that quest complete screen until you've escorted the thing back to base. A marker of success, which is an efficient and quick hunt, is not based solely on your skill. It is instead dictated by the land speed of a continent. And it's hard to imagine any way that you can spin that conclusion to be anything other than crushing. Of course, I appreciate that many may not be looking for blisteringly fast times, and that's perfectly fine. But the issue doesn't discriminate. Imagine you've hit the health cap with your team of buddies without knowing, and you're still whacking away, causing Lao to flinch and slow its advance. This is all damage that is essentially going nowhere, and worse still, it is actively hindering you from completing the hunt as it's taking longer for Lao Shan to get to its gravesite. And it's here where Lao gains its infamous reputation for being a boring fight. You're not getting the small breaks and flinches you would with more reasonably sized monsters, you're attacking the macro and not the micro here. So each flinch and break has to have the appropriate pomp and circumstance for something so large. It follows that this means these will happen a lot less, meaning that a majority of the melee fight is spent whacking a hit zone, moving around a tremor and repeating. Especially in Monster Hunter Wilds, where generating and destroying small wounds in focus mode is a key part of the combat, you have to wonder how that's going to function. Are we going to see many small wounds pop up to allow us to keep up, or will there be guaranteed spots for significant breaks or staggers? Will they be scripted? Will the precision movement of focus mode really matter when attacking something of this size? Gogmasios already has a high tolerance to wounding, and that's one of the more active colossal monsters. With something as passive as Lao, it's hard to imagine how wounding or focus strikes will land. Either you get your flinch and potentially delay the advance further, or the wounds are nothing more than a visual indicator for free damage whilst you're wailing on it. Nevertheless, eventually in the fight you'd traipse to the final area, where you'd have your last line of defense, the fortress walls. Lao would begin to assail this final barricade, and you'd have to keep the thing from draining the secondary health bar of the structure's integrity. This was a cool mechanic. It added an additional failure condition outside of losing your carts, as you'd also fail once this hit 0% integrity. In the original fight, here's where your artillery is present: ballista, cannons and the fabled Dragonator. You'd have to keep swinging, keep shooting, all whilst Lao slams into the fortress, depleting this new durability percentage. It's an inspired choice. With such a slow and mostly passive monster, there needed to be some stakes, so incorporating a second loss condition makes a ton of sense. You're also incentivized to use the tools present to cut short an attack with the Dragonator, or perhaps slowing it in its tracks with the Ballista Binder, and thus preserving the integrity of the fortress. Now, whilst this is impressive, you're going to want to make some armor and weapons out of the thing, aren't you? And we arrive, finally, at the issue with the current assumption that we have of Lao. It is a monster that is grand in its spectacle, an arduous marathon of a fight designed to test your patience and consistency in a group. Even the aforementioned 20-minute quest clear time I mentioned is for highly optimized teams, and it's likely you'd be using the full 35 minutes to take it down, if not repel. An ominous set piece, a hard time sink, yet you're going to need to do it over and over should you need the weapons and armor. Naturally, there will be those out there that like this fight, and I can see why. It is simple, easy to repeat once you get a good team together, and if time is no object, for those that like it, I can imagine it being a fun slugfest with your buddies. Of course, that's not to mention that visually it's very, very striking. Lao has the reputation it has because it was the first one to do this slow threatening advance towards a settlement, and whilst we see its influence throughout the series, from the Carapacion Shen Gaoren even up to 5th gen Zora Magdaros, I'm of the mind that to keep Lao from being a dreaded chore for most, some changes are needed. As I see it, I believe that Lao is fundamentally flawed as an experience as it's great as a set piece once. It really does not mesh well in a game that's about hunting things repetitively, and seeing tangible rewards for your skill improving. The core of Monster Hunter for me revolves around this. Your 50th fight against something is going to be a different experience than your first fight, as you improve, upgrade your gear, learn the intricacies of the matchup and so on. Monster Hunter is not a one and done action game, it's more methodical than that despite the design of Wilds seeming to suggest otherwise. So we're going to do a spot of speculation as a treat. Just because a fight was a bit rubbish once doesn't mean it's always going to be. Look at Alatreon for example, a massive glow up from 3rd gen, and I certainly enjoy Camelius' return in Rise. Capcom could completely revamp the Lao Shan experience, not to mention with all the fancy new toys included with Wilds, we could be looking at a completely brand new fight, especially with the boost bracer on its way to our Hunter's Toolkit. So let's just wax lyrical about how they could do that. First and foremost, we know the devs take reception on board, as in a recent interview it was revealed that a lot of Wilds' streamlining came from World's retention rate, so they're willing to learn from some mistakes. We've also seen 5th gen approach these longer auto-scroller type fights with the Kulve, Taroth and Safi Jiva sieges, and there's a bevy of DNA we can take from these and prior fights to allow us to see what options are available to us. I think we could start by saying there's a lot to borrow from the Kulve siege to make Lao Shan a bit more interactive of a fight. You were given a very wide variety of choices against Kulve, and combining all of them helped spice up the encounter. Loading cannons to snipe at predetermined intersections for Kulve? Why not bring back the mobile ballista cannon installation from Generations Ultimate? Using the rubble around the terrain for a vulnerability window and a lengthy topple? We see boulders falling in the Lao fights. Perhaps you could use your slinger to drop environmental hazards down at certain points. Additionally, breaking or damaging certain parts could give you a nicer hit zone. In Kulve's case it's the heated mantle when you attack her chest, but with Lao, you could perhaps damage the backplate for the ability to attack or increase your carving luck when you jumped on the back. Hell, how about breaking the face early would reduce the raw levels or damage the fortress in the final phase? There's a lot of different options available here. Naturally, of course, there's also the option for Lao to accelerate to the final area once it hits the damage cap. But with it being the slow, lumbering presence it is, I can't imagine it suddenly standing up straight and shooting off like it's seen a ghost in Scooby-Doo. The original Lao had a grand total of 3 areas it would plod along to before the final showdown. Generations Ultimate trimmed that down to just 2 total. You essentially had a 2-phase damage check, skipping the previous 4 area slog from Lao Shan of old. Of course, I'd like to see another option beyond this, and I know just the item for it. The Humble Ballista Binder. It was an item added around the 3rd generation. Instead of a damaging projectile, it fires grappling hooks onto a monster to pin them into place. In the 4th generation Gogmazios fight, you could also receive one-shot Ballista Binders that needed a couple of them to bring the oil dragon down to earth. Where I'm going with this is that Lao is typically fought in a canyon, a mountain range. Once you hit the damage for the threshold for the first area, I suggest that you could perhaps get a little pop-up telling you that you can now use the Ballista Binders. Once 2 or more of them are latched to the guy, you get the ability to smack it into weakened wall structures and send it tumbling downwards, to the next area. But what would be the benefit of this? In short, it's a way to not have the Lao fight be so damn slow, but it's still in a way that feels true to the ethos of the monster. You are still diverting a great threat. You still require precise timing for the munitions. It's now just factored in such a way that you aren't spending resources such as ammo plugging away at a monster that has already hit its health gate and for all intents and purposes is not taking any damage till it gets to the next zone. The control of the pace of the fight is back in the player's hands, giving you a sense of agency and participation rather than sitting around like chopped liver. That's not to say this is the only way to do it. You could still perhaps divert it with something akin to the Demolisher like in Generations Ultimate. Perhaps you could use a full volley of cannon fire next to a specific ledge. We aren't even fully aware of the capabilities of the boost bracer yet, there could be something there. My point being is that giving the players the option of how they wish to approach the fight and a reward for fully engaging with all that it offers would result in a more satisfying conclusion than having to surrender yourself to a walk cycle. As a side note, I will say that the 5th gen sieges did have their own rewards in the form of unique gear, but I don't think it's really necessary here. Lao has its own gear and armour in past games, and whilst there's definitely scope for this to be our avenue to upgrade our Artian weapons into G rank, I feel as though that would be doing a disservice to a weapon as wonderful looking as the Dragon Slayer, not to mention that armour design. In terms of tackling the repetition, my suggestion comes from the 3rd generation. In Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate, we were introduced to the Goldbeard Ceadeus, the G-rank subspecies that replaces the standard Ceadeus. Unlike the original, which had its own chase sequence before the final showdown, Goldbeard started out in this final area and was exclusively fought there. In the context of Lao, if players were given the option between a Repel quest with the full health and experience and a Slaying quest in the final area, that once again puts the control as players back in our hands. As a balancing option, perhaps I would suggest the Slay quest for the time convenience and the card rewards comes with a more damaging Lao, depleting the fortress HP faster and causing more damage with its bites and tail swipes. You'd need to be on your additional installments such as the Dragonator to ensure you interrupt the monster before the fort fell, but conversely if your damage or team isn't up to snuff, there's always the easier but longer repeatable Repel quest. An option for everyone, and something that might just improve Lao Shan's reputation for needing a calendar appointment to plan out. These of course are my own thoughts and options on a way to adjust the fight. I'm not completely averse to Lao, but it's certainly not my can of worms. There's a million different things that could be done with Old Mountain Joe here, and it is anyone's guess as to how they're going to adjust the guy in Ascendance. That's my guess, and you bet he's going to be one of the first monsters I beeline to see what they've done with him. Of course, you may disagree, you may see it differently, and if you're nice about it, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for making this far and for watching the video. Make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.